Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. You're listening to a new episode of Crucial Conversations podcast with the Blue Lava community, where we gather and share expert insights on security program management delivered with, by, and for the most respected security leaders around the world. Together, we'll explore solutions to the most pressing business challenges unique to the careers of CISOs and cybersecurity executives. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Marco.
Sean.
Here we are. Are you following or are you leading?
Today I am following. I'm following you. I don't know.
Follow my lead.
I'm gonna go blind wherever. I'm taking my risk today.
Well, this is try number 2. We had some technical difficulties the other day, and perhaps it's for the better. We're gonna leave some forest animals behind and have a good old chat about security leadership today. And everybody's
who knows?
What the heck the forest
maybe some animals will pick into the conversation anyway. We'll see. But we're
know.
not gonna lead with that. Well, we're gonna lead
an animal.
I don't know. I'm not gonna go there.
All right.
Unless there is a pizza in front of you. In that case, I'm not gonna touch it. You
That's
may
right. Stay
end up
away.
biting me.
Animal bites at that point. All right. But yeah, for those listening and watching, of course, you're tuned into a Crucial Conversations podcast here with the Blue Lava community, which is all about supporting each other as security leaders in this crazy world that we live in of InfoSec and cybersecurity. And yeah, I think it's for the CISO, by the CISO, and with the CISO and their entire team. And I'm thrilled to have an amazing guest on. He's been on the show before, and I'd like to call him a good friend. I don't know if he'll let me, but nonetheless, we have Dutch Schwartz on. Dutch, thanks for being here.
You bet. I'm glad to be here. Thanks. I appreciate you asking me back. So either it was really, really bad, and so it was riveting, or I did an okay job. So no, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
It's good stuff. And before we get into the mix, a few words about you, Dutch, and some of the things you've been up to. Maybe a quick view into your journey.
Yeah, sure.
Into your role.
Yeah. So, my current role is a cloud security strategist. It's exactly what it sounds like, right? So I really spend my time with CISOs and to some degree architects, cloudifying, if I can use that word, make it up, cloudifying their acceleration, right? Cloudifying their journey as it relates to security. So that's kind of how I spend my days. In terms of how I got here, it's an interesting story. We probably, that's what I said this before a few times, but it's almost always an interesting story. I like, especially in our age range, of asking people how they get in. So I got in accidentally, which seems pretty common from the era. So I was a military officer. I transitioned from active duty into the reserves. I was going back to school, and just looking for a regular job, as it were. And I got into the IT field. I had a friend who had interviewed somewhere. She's like, "Hey, I think you'd be great for this." And the rest, as they say, is history. So I've spent time in network integration and storage, embedded computing, and a variety of things over the years, which maybe we'll pull forward, and maybe that will be relevant. But in the last decade or so, really in the security field, primarily on the vendor side of the table, and hopefully we're bringing that table closer together, right? So that we're all sort of pulling in the same direction. But yeah, that's my backdrop. So what I hope to provide in conversations is a community, a sense of connection, right, to other people, and perspective, right? Because as somebody who's in that kind of a role where I'm working with others, that's what I aim to do, right? Is give perspective, right? So maybe Marco has a question, and maybe that's not something that I've seen before, but I can reach out to Sean and say, "Hey, have you seen this before?" And that's a pretty common way to go about my week, if that makes sense. A lot of times it's a specific question, and rather than just give sort of my answer or the textbook answer, I try to connect with the rest of the community. I think I know we're going to talk about this later, but that's part of the power, right, of a community like this, is that if somebody's seen that in their environment and maybe I haven't, it's super helpful, right, to get that kind of a context. So that's what I strive to do.
And this is actually part of why we have this conversation, right? Yeah, to put the community together. And why do you want to reinvent the wheels all the time?
It's fun.
Somebody's gone through it, maybe.
Right.
It's fun. Yeah, and I think it's important to look at the journey into the role, especially as we start to look at what a leader is. I mean,
Mhm.
my path into the security space was for a construction company. They asked me to do some encryption on an app that they built, and I'm like, "What the heck is that?" I did some research, did some coding, and voila, out came an app, and that was my foray into infosec, among other things. And then, but I guess my point is, if I'm a security leader, do I have to have that knowledge of encryption to be a good leader in this space? Because many roles can draw upon what is a leader, and not really
Right.
care about what job you're doing. But I feel as an industry, we put a certain level of expectation that people have a certain level of knowledge,
Sure.
training, even certification. So your thoughts on that to kind of kick this off?
Yeah, and I think this was a really hot take, like pre-pandemic, quite frankly, right? I mean, it was a discussion, in the hotel lobby bar and at conferences, right? It was pretty hefty, right? You had sort of the seven archetypes, if I'm remembering that one that came out correctly, and then kind of at an individual level, I had more than one conversation with my own CISO, technical CISO, business CISO. And even 4 years ago, I was saying, I don't know if that's helpful, right? To make it a binary, it's, to me anyway, I don't find that to be super helpful, and I think it's a spectrum, right? The point there is there was a time and place where that discussion probably was relevant, right? And part of that is just the maturity of the role and the expectations of a CISO role, right? So historically, the vast majority of CISOs were, and many still are, within the CIO IT organization, which makes sense. We grew out of that org, right? But as we started to branch off, that's where things, there wasn't a structure there really, right? So even though people had CISO level titles or were de facto CISOs, there wasn't a lot of history there to say, well, what really is this expectation for this role, right? And so I think as we moved through this great social experiment that we unintendedly had to go into in terms of the pandemic, the business itself recognized how critical data and access to data and security was, if they didn't realize that before. And so what that does is it changes, not in a grandiose way, but it puts a real spotlight on cybersecurity and the fact that many companies today are really software companies, right? At the heart of where they derive value, it's the data, the connection that they have with their customers or maybe their supply chain, and that changes it, right? To now, we don't have to sort of make it a, how do we get the board's attention? We have the board's attention in most cases in public companies in America, right? So that changes that, and so commensurate with that change, we have to kind of help that next generation, right, of CISOs to find that balance, right? Again, I'm not saying it's one or the other. It's a balance. We the three of us start a company tomorrow. Does one of us need to be hands on keyboard? Absolutely. Sean's going to jump back in and practice Web 3.0 and whatever the next thing is, and one of us has to do that, right? But at scale, like a CFO, like a CMO, like other C-level suites, you don't have to have that hands-on keyboard skill anymore. You need to know what good looks like, right? You need to know how long should it take to do a particular sprint or a project, or right. So you have to have experience, but you don't have to have root access. You don't have to be going in and configuring things. So to me, that's kind of the change. I don't know, how does that land with you guys?
Well, I remember a lot of conversation with Sean where many times we bring the sport metaphor. Right? In order to be a good trainer, a good coach, do you need to be the best player?
Right.
Look how well that worked for the French coach.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. Yeah, that's a great analogy, Marco, because I don't know the stats, but anecdotally, there have been many phenomenal coaches who they themselves were decent. Now, I mean, decent in the world of professional sports, right? Still better than
obviously.
But if you look at a Steve Kerr or a Phil Jackson, they were on great teams. They were not the top 3 or 4 players at all, right? And so there's probably a good psychology study in there to say, well, look, if I'm the sixth person on the bench, or if I'm somebody who comes in as a reliever for baseball, or if I come in towards the last 5 minutes in a soccer match, maybe I'm watching that and I'm learning in a different way, right? Because I know I'm not the star player, right? And it puts a different lens on that. And my observation is you tend to think about it differently when you have to study it, because you're just maybe not as naturally as gifted as some of the other folks. Doesn't take away from their stardom and what they bring, but it's a different mentality. You have to be intentional, right? You have to study. You have to bring a different set of skills. So Sean, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm also thinking, sticking with the sports view here, not every player plays every position either, right? Kind of to my point, my early days had some encryption. Can I remember that now? No. How does that relate to Web3? I don't know, blockchain, maybe PKI type stuff. There might be some of that in there.
Yeah.
But Web3 is going to be very, very different, right? So even playing a position at one point doesn't mean I know how the game is played now. Strategies change. I've seen in American football changes of how they approach the end zone and make it across the line. It looks almost like rugby or something.
Right.
Not traditional American football. So I guess things change over time, and I'm wondering how we as security leaders then can rally our teams and support our teams to know what's important to keep on top.
So somebody throw this out. So here's a way of thinking about it. Okay. So people, process, and technology, right? We've used it for so long, right, that it's kind of just become a de facto. So my pop quiz is, so who popularized it in our world? Do you guys remember who popularized that idea? It was Bruce Schneier. In 1999. Well, what's interesting is, and he's not that he said he was, but he's not the person who created that idea. The idea actually comes from the 1960s from a thing called Levitt's diamond. Okay, it was an American professor. Over time, he kind of morphed it over the years into what we now know as people, process, and technology. Bruce, by his own admission in a blog he wrote later, said, the reason I brought that up was at the time it was just tech. Right, he was trying to show a light that we need people in process, right? Which was very, if you think about 1990, that totally makes sense, right? So what I would say is, okay, so any kind of mental model, they're super useful, right? We have a common understanding, taxonomy, we can talk about it, we can look at kind of the same lens, and then we get to argue, right? I think that we've outstripped that, right? So I would suggest that in addition to people, process, and technology, it's leadership, culture, and strategy. It's those three things that actually unlock these three things, right? And so leadership, culture, and strategy are absolutely critical, I think, for as we move into this next gen of security leadership. You've got to be able to do those things, right? And culture is the bedrock of how you make those changes while still staying connected to people, right? Leadership, the topic here, and strategy, we can do another session some other time. But leadership is critical, and we've come at it from a standpoint of, because so many people came up through the ranks, as it were. There's a lot of great grounded stories, and I'm sure Sean, you and Marco, that we have from that, but it's not repeatable, right? It's not scalable. We can't train people that way, right? And so when I think of the next generation, what we have to do is we have to help them understand management and leadership are not the same thing, right? We conflate those two ideas, and they're not the same. You need both, to be clear, but leadership is about people. Right? It's about how I connect with Marco. Do I understand what drives Marco's behavior? Do I figure out how to connect with your values, Marco, and help you understand the bigger picture? Management is about process, right? It's about workflow. You need both, right? But I could be a leader and not have a title, and I could also be a manager and to be candid, not be that great of a leader. And that might be okay. Maybe I'm in a caretaker role where I just need to make sure that everything flows, okay? But leadership is fundamentally different, right? And there's great models, there's tons of learning out there, but our field is kind of unintentionally lagging because we came up through a technical expertise, 10,000 hours kind of hand on keyboard thing, which has a lot of value. But I would say that we're at an inflection point where now we've got to go, hey, to connect with the business, because we're an enabler of the business, we've really got to understand return on invested capital. We have to understand how does the business make money? Where's the business headed? And even when I see kind of very forward-thinking CISOs, and some of them are here in the Blue Lava community, right? But we have to get the next generation to see that, right? Are the directors of security talking to the directors of finance, right? Are the managers, right, talking to their management peers in logistics? If they're not, we're doing them a disservice, right? We need to start making those connections today. So as they go through their career, they can reach out to Marco, who's in legal, right? And be like, hey, and we already have a relationship. We have a rapport because we came up together, right? That's where I think there's a lot of opportunity for the community to help the next generation. What do you guys think about that?
I agree with you 100%. And I think that we could talk about this for a very, very long time, because again, to go back to what you said, the the 1990s, or the origin of this business. We talk about the first CISO, and a conversation we had with him where he mentioned the necessity maybe to be having more CISO, not just one, because you need different knowledge. And I would love to go into this, but before we do that, I'm thinking like, it makes sense in a young industry that at the beginning, where do you go? Like, let's go back to the football or the sport. Like at the beginning, who's going to teach? Who's going to teach the person that plays?
Right.
But then when it becomes an NFL, you have a coach for defense, a coach for a particular team, you get a coach for another, and you need to understand a lot more things and the business. And to be a leader, what is the thing, on your opinion? And I think you kind of said that, but let's stay there. What is that the leader really needs? It needs leadership skills.
Yeah. So you have to have, to your point, Marco, right? So we all will start with, you have to have technical competence, right? Whether we're playing, American football or whatever, right? And so you're right. It's totally a natural outcome to me at that curve, right? We started as technical, of course, then we pull the people along with us as technical. And you're right. You get to a level where it shifts is where you have to scale it, right? That's one of the shifts that you have to be able to do. And you have to engage people emotionally. And I know we don't spend a lot of time on this, right? But you have to, if I can't connect with Sean, right, on here's the why for the team, here's my why, if you can't do that, then you're just going to be an okay leader, right? Leaders have to say, here's the vision of the future. Here's why we are thinking that we're going to go this way. And I've got to help that connect to you. Because if it doesn't connect to you, then it's just a job. And that's okay, right? We've all had jobs where I'm just trying to pay for my groceries and pay for my rent this month. That's okay, right? But over time, you've got to get to a place where Sean feels excited and engaged. Because if you're not excited and engaged, then one of two things will happen. You'll either burn out, right, which we've all seen happen, or two, you'll make mistakes of effort. And what I mean by that is that when you don't have a broader perspective and you're not feeling engaged, then you just don't think about things more broadly, right? Your whole focus really narrows, right? And you can see mistakes that people make. It's very common. If I look at other high stress places, right? Air traffic controllers, the military where I came from, first responders. That's one of the things that we teach everybody, right? There's some stuff we want you to do just remote, like without thinking, right? Because we know there's simple things you can do. Most of those we do to give yourself breathing room. So now I can think about, well, what do I need to do, right? But if I'm not happy, if I'm not engaged, if I'm not inspired, it's very hard to get creative work out of people. You just won't, right? And so that's the piece where I think we can really develop a lot. So as a leader, it's my responsibility to tell you purpose, direction, and to give you mentoring and motivation, right? Why are we doing this? Where are we headed, right? I need to mentor you, and motivation varies depending on your structure and your role. And it might be a little mentoring, but it might be like removing obstacles for you. It might be saying, hey, Sean, I know you're really great in this area. Let's get you some more training in that area. So those to me are the fundamentals, right? Purpose, direction, mentoring, and motivation. As a leader, you have to be able to do those, regardless of the domain that you're in. That's how I would think about it.
And then reality sets in. And a bunch of other stuff comes your way.
Sure.
And it's some of the other stuff that I want to maybe touch on here for a moment.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a different analogy. So I'm going to go with a music band, marching band, drum major in a parade.
Okay.
Where the drum major is leading that band to march a certain way and play the music a certain way to look and sound great, right? And as a good leader, they're bringing everybody together in unison and the right volume and whatever. And then you have, in a competition, you have judges, right, that are looking at you. Are your feet actually in step? Is the music at the right pace? Did you play at the right time in front of the judge? All these different, I'm not going to go all the different things. Basically, eyes are on you. Mm-hmm. And it's more than just, I've inspired the band and they're playing well. It's, are they playing well and inspiring the audience and the judges to get what they need done successfully? And so it brings me to the question of leading the team is one thing, but then managing up also and having eyes on you as you're being a leader is another. And so how do we as leaders deal with that?
Well, I've seen people that I think are doing both sides of that, if you will, right? Both parts of that spectrum really well. they are marketing and connecting to the other leaders in the organization, right? And it may be a scenario where Marco and I came in and we're new, and I'm his deputy CISO. We came in, and for whatever, we may initially really need to market and brand who security is and what we do. Maybe there's a latent perception. Maybe they wouldn't even be able to tell you, right? But that's kind of the management by walking around that Marco and I would probably do those first 30 days. Like, hey, what is the vibe, right? What's the mood here but with cybersecurity? And we kind of know the classic sense of how people perceive that, but you got to go out and kind of talk to the troops, not just our troop, but everybody, right? I understand that. But you've got to position security as a business enabler. And the two ways to really leverage that are, number one is to listen to the other people. Like, sit with your CFO, sit with counsel, sit with your other key leaders, and just say, hey, like, Marco, I don't know a lot about cost accounting. I don't know a lot about it. Can you tell me a little bit how that plays into what we do, right? And it's just really listening to them and kind of showing some empathy and interest. If you're authentically interested, if I show Marco that I mentioned, he's likely to help, to want to help me, right? So you got to make a connection with the people. And then as time goes on, you have to be, frankly, kind of make sure that you brand and highlight your team, where you have wins. And then through that, where the people have wins, right? So let's say we'll pick on, security awareness for a second. When you have something great that happens because Sean notices something and he's an employee in HR and he catches, something, you want to applaud that, right? And whatever that mechanisms are inside your culture, right? Whether it's stickers or icons, or every team has different ways of doing that, right? But you've got to highlight that and be like, hey, great job, Sean. Sean's not even a security person. Great job, right? Like, you've got to change that mood. And that's back to the culture piece. And there are models that you can use, and there's a ton of them. So one that I'm comfortable with is Dr. Carrie Perlson from MIT, and Kaman Wong is their co-author. And they talk about values, attitudes, and beliefs. And I draw this one sometimes, and I could go to the whiteboard because it kind of resonates usually with technical people, right? But those are the inputs: values, attitudes, and beliefs, right? And when the outputs is culture, right? So, but those are things that we can use, not because they're levers to pull, but to understand, right? I'm not going to change your values, Sean, right? But I should understand what do you think is important? That's your value, right? Your attitude is like, how do you like to work, right? Are you more of an introvert? Do you love being in collaboration? Do I need to get you different, tools to make sure that you can collaborate? Do you love being off hours and doing it? Your attitude is important for me to gauge how to resource you. And then your beliefs are what you think is important. Same thing. I can't change those. But when I'm interviewing in particular, I'm trying to match those up from both sides. No right or wrong here, guys, right? But I got to try to match those as best I can. And then as you start to write that culture, like, oh, we need to make some changes, some subtle changes in culture, it's got to be bounded within those things. And I got to come back to and say, hey, Marco, you and I talked about sports and and I have to find a way to connect with you. You got to do it with your peers. If you're not doing it with your CRO, your CMO, outside counsel as well, that's where I see sometimes people being great kind of internal leaders, but maybe that's an area for growth for them as it relates to the business itself. So what do you guys?
I go back to what you said at the beginning about sitting at a table and getting closer, right? And bringing in the different perspective, because the way I look at that is also what you said is you need to know the why you're doing something. It doesn't matter if you're sharpening a pencil. You need to know that pencil then has a function and makes maybe something good in society. You're going to be much happier than somebody say, just sharp that pencil, that needle, or the division of the work. And it's not the industrial revolution here. We need to be inspired, and I feel like everybody is part of a team. Even at the C level, you're still part of that team. And where I'm going there is you need to communicate, and communication comes with then explaining the why, inspiring, giving direction, and motivating people. And what I'm trying to go here is, again, communication skill and all of those soft skill that I hate so much, that word and that composition. So tell me more about the soft skill that shouldn't be that. They're not that.
Yeah,
soft.
no, I love this. Yeah, because we've talked about this a bunch of different times, right? So soft skills, the phrase itself, is, as far as I can tell from my research, comes out of a research study done in December of 1972 at the behest of the U.S. Army. So I can take 1% credit since I was an Army officer. But no, kidding aside, they were doing a study And in that study was the author's name was Dr. Paul Whitmore. And he said soft skills, I'm paraphrasing here, we're simply the skills that involve people and paper. Okay. Why is it relevant? Well, at the time they were trying to delineate between I'm fixing, a Jeep. I'm actually doing something physical, with weaponry or some kind of system. He was really just trying to delineate those. And he actually goes on to say that they probably need to tighten up the definition, which is deeply ironic, right? But that's where that phrase comes from. And so they were really just trying to separate it. Even if you put it even in context around the United States, right? In 1972, I went back and looked at the GDP. Our GDP was primarily mining, manufacturing, and agriculture, right? That was where we were coming from. So the delineation of soft skills was people skills. You could have called it people skills.
You just make me think of software and hardware. I mean, if we want to look at the etymology of words,
right?
That's a great point.
Yeah, exactly. So we've morphed it into something that, at least as I understand his research, that was not what he was intending to say. Right? It would have landed differently back in 1972 versus today, right? But if you watch it, if you go look at the Ngram, you can see kind of was popular and then it faded out and it became popular again. Maybe accidentally, or maybe it's relevant, but around agile time, right? So
those are firm skills.
Yeah, firm skills. Yeah, exactly. So those are the areas where I think that you mentioned communication, Marco. That's so critical, right? Because again, if I'm great at doing a task, that's awesome. And if that's my wheelhouse and I love doing it, that's cool, right? But in the same way that in American military, if you're going to get promoted, if you're going to lead other people, I have to leave some of that behind. Trust me, it's painful. Like nobody, you still want to be the expert, right? But you have to let go of that because you have to lean into, look, I have to be able to tell you why we're doing this. I have to be able to communicate my vision. I have to be able to inspire you. I have to be able to communicate as we make adjustments. I have to be able to communicate those adjustments, both left, right, up, and down, right? And those skills are so critical. And I think there's a recognition, right, with emotional intelligence, and you see more of these things being talked about. But we have a long way to go because historically, in a formal fashion, we haven't trained these, right? If I look at degree programs, are starting to change now, right? But if I look at the degree programs or even certifications, the skills, they didn't focus on those, right? And so where we are today, we've got to do better, right, for the next gen of folks. Because if you can't communicate that effectively with me and inspire the people, then it's gonna feel lacking. Right. And I think that's where the community can really help out. Sean, when you look at a thought.
I do have a thought, and it's very it's going to be very pointed and meaningful. No, it's communication to me sounds very one directional. And I feel there's a need for conversation and leading up to this, we talked a bit about storytelling, which is where you can kind of relate the why we're doing this, but then also wrap in there the how and the who and the when and what ifs and all these other things that come along. And I don't know how many triangles we've talked about today, but we either have a 9 or a 12 pointed triangle at this point when we start to overlay all these different frameworks and ideas on top of each other. And at one point you talked about drawing on a whiteboard, and I'm wondering, let's get into some examples here and some real concrete advice for the community where something's worked for you, where it wasn't a presentation, it wasn't a project requirements document, it was a real conversation rooted in story with people engaging at a whiteboard or wherever it is.
Sure.
To come out with something meaningful that really demonstrates leadership.
Yeah. So I'll do one, and then we'll see if that one kind of resonates with you. So one that I'm thinking about is I had someone who's an ethical hacker, really, really skilled, right? And so I would say sort of that 10,000 hours, mindset, right? Like really, really great in this one, admittedly at his, kind of experience and age level, somewhat narrow area, but really, really strong, really, really technically strong. And when I would spend time with him, I'd watch him, what he was doing in service to, we were working with customers. And, at one point I said, I need you to abstract that. I said, can you abstract what you're doing? I've seen you do it. I definitely couldn't do it. I understand what you're doing, I think, but I need you to abstract that, because we need to figure out a way to help move this out, right, beyond, just me and you. And it was a bit of a struggle conversation, right? Because like, well, I just do these things. I'm like, no, I've watched you, but I need you to. And it kind of was on a Friday, and I kind of try to hit him up, and I'm like, hey, let's just mess around with it over the weekend, okay, and pretend that the person that you're going to tell this to on Monday is smart but ignorant. And I mean the original meaning of ignorant. I mean, in other words, they are able to catch on to new ideas, but they're not familiar with what you're talking about. And I'm like, so whatever that analogy is, I don't know if it's your aunt, your mom, your Uncle Fred, but pretend that, and come back to me on Monday and tell me what are and I don't know what we're going to call them, principles, but something, let's abstract some things. It doesn't need to be 10. I don't care. If you tell me it's 7, if it's 13, I don't care. But just abstract those things that you do and come back. And we came back and we kind of made a breakthrough. He's like, okay, I think it's these things. Sorry, I didn't land on an even number. It's 11. I'm like, 11 it is. Let's go with that. Okay, what would that look like, right? Pretend that we just hired Marco and you're trying to coach him, and he doesn't have your background, but he's interested. He's willing to learn. Where would he go to learn that? And we were able to just kind of click, kind of keep double clicking, as it were, over time, and build that out into a process that we documented, and we turned that into training that we could use for other people. And that was all his knowledge, just to be clear, but not my knowledge at all. It's his knowledge, right? But it's just kind of coaching him, say, hey, how do we take the great stuff that you've learned, and they'll never be you, but how do I take the lessons from that? And then, as that continued to develop, I said, okay, now I need you to dive into the business. I need you to read HBR and MIT. I want you to be able to connect with people. When he was sort of like, well, that's your role. I'm like, right, but I'm not always going to be here. Like, I need you to do this without me, and at least be a reasonable facsimile of that, right? So I kind of pushed him into, hey, go check out these podcasts, go read these books, and they had nothing to do with what he was uncomfortable. He would say that, but to push him that way so that he could then, grow in his career, not to give up or move away from what he really loved doing, but to have an understanding of what it's like to be the business person on that other side of the table, and not just sort of geek speak at them, which we all got on our side of the table, but they don't understand, right? And so, and I hope that helped mature him, him move into his career, and he's moved on, somewhere else. And I hope it was a good experience. Sean, does that give you kind of like a small example, but what that looks like?
I'm going to take it here, Sean. Sorry, but for me, it's very relevant. The fact that this person, he had it inside. It just needed to, bring it out. And someone else may have not had it that inside. Some people are spontaneously and naturally, organically more prone to a better communication. I guess you're going to do a podcast, you kind of need to have that, right? But it doesn't mean that you cannot learn, but it also means that you need to be desire to do that, but you need that basic skill. So if you go to CISO school, right, whatever it is,
sure,
and all they're asking you to do is test and resolve cybersecurity and engineering and mathematical things, like, not soft, then you're going to lack that skill. Which is the other way around. You may be the great communicator and leader, but you don't know anything about what are you leading, right?
Right.
So I don't know, Sean, does it ring any bell for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things I want to say for that story. The first is I didn't hear it until almost the end, and I want to get your point on this, Dutch, the why, and it kind of connects to my second comment here, which is, our industry kind of holds ourselves up as these unicorns that only know where the end of the rainbow is and how to get there and unlock it once we arrive. And so to me, a good leader describes the why, right? So that the action is meaningful, but also in a way that doesn't, or at least the why is greater than the potential risk of that person sharing the code to that pot of gold. So I don't know. To me, that's a leader, right? Is to enable the team in a way that helps the rest of the organization grow, in a way that enables the business to succeed, even if they've moved on.
Right. So, each of those is going to be slightly different, right? So in this case, the individual happened to also have a military background, right? So I'll be sort of general, but I was able to kind of tap into what I knew about his background and what I knew sort of about his ambition and things that I knew he felt like these things were values to him, right? And it just had to, some of the conversation, I don't want to say it was not one conversation, it was more than one conversation. Once, sometimes over dinner, sometimes over watching sport, and just kind of continue to say, hey, look, at the end of the day, security does not exist for its own sake. We don't, right? And we're in danger of thinking that we do. Every domain does this, by the way, right? I mean, it's easy, right? Because it's everybody you talk to, everybody we think about, and it's so easy to have, sort of that echo chamber, right? Where we're only talking about that. But we exist to enable the business to knowingly take the risks that it wants to take, and then to manage and mitigate those risks when they become problematic. That's why we exist, right? And so at the heart of it, you have to get back to what's the mission of the organization. And sometimes you have to pull harder, because if you're in a commercial enterprise, it may not be as clear, right? It's super easy, right? When you're in the military, we're in the defense complex, we're in your public sector, it's easier, right, to say, well, we're critical. But when you get farther out, if you will, into the commercial sector, you really have to figure out, I've got to know that team, right? And go, guys, this is important to us, right? And this is why we need to do it. And there has to be a level of trust there, right? That you've earned over time, that they're willing to maybe be uncomfortable and go down a path, kind of like Marco said at the beginning, where, I'm following, and I'm not exactly sure how this is going to play out. And that's just something that there's an art and a science to the leadership, right? And I could draw the science up on a board, right? There's tons of that. There's still an art to that, right? There's an art and a science. And the art is that piece of, well, I tried it this way with Sean, and wow, the sports analogy didn't land. Now I'm going to try the music analogy. Okay, that didn't land. Now I'm going to try a cooking analogy. Baking is science, and being a cook, right? My mom would say baking is science, because if you screw that up, you don't put the baking soda in, it doesn't work, right? Cooking is an art, right? She's, my mom, I think, was very good at both. But I mean, so I would keep going until I find something that would connect with you, Sean, right?
The power of metaphor. I mean, in storytelling, if we want to go back to storytelling, the metaphor is what can open the mind for understanding something that you're familiar with. And I'd like to start wrapping with, empowering people, because that's what you're kind of going with. The leader can retain all the control. That's why you lead. You choose your team. You empower your team. You trust your team. So what will be an advice, I don't know, for you to give to somebody that goes into leadership, I don't know, learning how to let go, and trust others?
Yeah, that's a great question, because there's probably more than one answer depending on their background, right? So, but I do want to leave, because we talked about this in advance and I was listening to the other conversations, right? So I do want to leave everybody with something concrete, right? So this is a book called FYI, all right? As you can see, I've had it for, I'm embarrassed, Marco, I'm getting older, but over 20 years, okay? And because of probably the age range I came in, and because I was in the military, I probably saw all the models that you could at the time I did, right? So I can tell you everything about my Cruc occupational survey, my Myers-Briggs, TQM, right? We all lived through all those, okay? So for me, the reason there's this, and this is volume 2, by the way, or the second printing of this. It's since changed, okay? So I particularly, and you can go find it used. There's no reason to buy that, for $60. Go find it for a couple dollars and get the used one. Here's what I like about this. 2 things. One, the research that it was originally based on, it says that there's not 2, to your point, Sean, 2 axes, but there's 3, okay? And so you have the typical quadrant. Oh, Marco is, more emotive than Dutch is, and so forth, the normal quadrant thing. The key is the Z. How good is Marco at connecting with me? And that's where this model, I think, is super useful. I've used it over the years. Functionally, what the book is, it's a list of competencies, okay? Here, let's pick one at random. Conflict management, okay? What's a competency? Now we'll go with Dutch's definition, because HR people haven't agreed on this. I think there's 3 levels. There's knowledge. Sean studies a thing, takes a test, he demonstrates knowledge. That's awesome. That's a start, okay? Then there's a skill. So let's say the knowledge that Sean did was he studied the OWASP top 10. Okay. So, and we took a test and we're like, okay, Sean, at least it displayed some desire, Marco, to your point, and it has some level of knowledge. Okay. Then he works in a role where he gets to use that. Okay. So he develops a skill, but his skill is still narrow. It's deep, but it's narrow. He knows how to configure a web application firewall to mitigate the top 10. That's cool. That's valuable. Okay. A competency is an abstract level of that. It's the next layer up, because a competency is a skill which transfers from role to role, right? So competencies are drive for results, self-learning, conflict management, dealing with ambiguity. Guys, when we're hiring people, those are the things. Communication skills is one of them. Presentation skills. Those are the things. And you can learn that if you are a lifeguard. You can learn that if you worked in a charity. You can learn that if you're a stay-at-home parent. You can learn that, right? It also frees that up. It's not domain specific. So what I would suggest is pick that book up or find another book, that resonates with you. But I've used that when I had the freedom to write job descriptions over the years. I've always included some of those, because that allows you to have a different background and for me to connect with Sean if he comes from a totally different field. And if in that particular role, conflict management, presentation skills, and dealing with ambiguity are super important, Sean can demonstrate that. And maybe he comes from manufacturing. And guess what? If he's got desire, then I can train him. Cybersecurity is not that special, guys. If you're interested and willing, then I should be able to train you. And if I can't, then that's on me. That's a me side of the table, right? I have to be able to do that. Doesn't take away from people's passion, their background, the years of experience, so that I'm gonna get all angry emails. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we have to be able to do that. We don't have a shortage of good people. We have a shortage of how we think about bringing people into cybersecurity. That's the shortage. The shortage is a lack of creativity. We should be hiring psychologists. We should be hiring anthropologists. We should be hiring people from social sciences, because guess what, guys? Cybersecurity is an interesting field. Okay. There's a lot of room for other people. And if we keep hiring the same backgrounds, we're probably gonna get the same results, right? So we can do better. And so that would be my one takeaway. If you pick up that book, you can go look at a job description and go, God, let me rewrite this a little bit. Or when I'm interviewing, or if I'm moving people, inside the company, you can use that to help reframe that. And by the way, it tells you what good looks like. It tells you what not good looks like. And it gives you some ideas of and here's where you should go, if that's an area that you want to improve on. So I hope that was concrete. I know Sean wanted to land.
I do. I think that's perfect, Dutch. And I think from my own experience, so it's not just bringing people in or moving them around, but in their current role, giving them clear objectives and managing them, leading them to those objectives. So it's not just in their MBOs and management by objectives that they have configured the WAF for the OWASP top 10. It's also measurements on, were you able to communicate the value of that in the team meeting? Were you able to present that? Were you able to resolve a conflict when you turned on a configuration and then it broke the retail process or whatever it is, right? Those you have to, my opinion, you have to give clear direction, help them achieve the goal for that direction, and measure them and help them achieve the measurement that you've set for them. And to me, that's a sign of a good leader as well.
Yeah, great stuff.
Yep. Well, this is really cool. I mean, we could probably talk for another few hours, pick another corner of the 12-point triangle and go there. And perhaps we will. Who knows? Maybe we'll have another chat or two with you, Dutch, to dig into some of those other things. But super insightful conversation today. Definitely some nuggets for folks to take with them. And of course, as part of the community, they can connect with you, Dutch, and keep the conversation going with you and others that have different or similar experiences.
Awesome. Hey, let me leave you guys with a thought or an idea. So I listened to the other conversations, and of course, some of the folks I know, right, firsthand. But the last couple of minutes, I listened sort of like the last 5 minutes of everybody else's. Maybe we should abstract those into a because everybody, you guys do a great job of, I hope, making us all look like we have intelligent and helpful things to say. But at those last 5 or 6 minutes of everyone that I listened to, I actually made a note in my phone. Everybody had some really cool ideas. So maybe we should put those out or start running. I don't know what the right format is, but I think that would be useful, because if I'm trying to get up to speed quickly, I'd be like, oh, that thing that Billy Pugh said on this was really great. And the thing that, like, there's some really great learnings in there.
I think it's a great idea. Yeah, I think it's an excellent idea. And then people maybe get inspired by one of those, 10 different abstract, and they go and deep into the full conversation. So that's great. I really appreciate that. So we're going to actually, Sean, we're going to ask him a couple of minutes to tell him the last few points.
Yeah, well, I think he gave the advice, but maybe just a thought about the community, if you don't mind, Dutch.
Yeah, I think the power of the community is, number one, it lets you know that you're not alone, which is really important, right? Number two, Marco, you brought up before, it may just be, this is novel to me because I haven't run into this particular flavor or this version. It's highly likely in a community that somebody else has, or they say, oh, I've seen that in multimedia, or I've seen that in manufacturing. And to do that in a safe way that you can in the community is really super, super valuable. Otherwise, you're kind of going through your own secret squirrel network and trying to find people and, gosh, who really knows this thing? And that can be really hard to do. So, and the community is uplifting. At least, that's how it comes to me, right? I mean, even listening, and again, a bunch of these folks, I already know them, and even still listening, I was like, wow, that was great. That was really, to your point, Marco, that was really inspiring. Or I didn't know, this person was really deep in that area. So it just gives you a way to connect with others without having a barrier in a safe way, right? And right now we need to accelerate everybody's learning, and I think the community does a great job of doing that. So I encourage people to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. And I think thus far, I don't know how many conversations we've had, but a lot of them have been on topics that people are very familiar with and very comfortable with. And in addition to the snippets that you mentioned, Dutch, we're actually working with Chris on something like that as well already.
Oh, cool.
We're also looking to bring together a panel of folks where not everybody has the answers, right? And we have a conversation that says, we don't know. What do we think? And I think those will be interesting as well.
Yeah.
So lots to explore in this community. And of course, if it's just me and Marco, that community is not going to be very strong. So we need the rest of you guys and gals to participate and contribute and drive these conversations. So for everybody listening, thank you for joining us for this one. There'll be links to, I don't know why Marco's picture just went, but there'll be links to Dutch's social profile and other resources that maybe a link to the book, perhaps other resources that Dutch thinks are valuable for folks to read and listen. And I think that's it. There's plenty more by the CISO for all of us as security leaders. And so thanks everybody for joining us for this Crucial Conversations.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Crucial Conversations podcast with the Blue Lava community. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.